This presentation of In Their Own Words is dedicated to the brave men and women of the United States Armed Forces. When the Allies invaded France in June of 1944, there were many soldiers from many nations riding across the rough English Channel that stormy dawn. But perhaps none were so well prepared for the awful battle ahead as those of the American Army's Rangers. They were America's first Special Forces group, the best of the best. Many would be the first to hurl themselves in harm's way. Leonard Lomell was chosen from thousands of applicants for the elite job of training the 1st Ranger Group.
Well, I was in the 76th Infantry Division, that was called the Liberty Division, in the Headquarters Company, 417th Infantry Regiment. And I was chosen, another young man who was a professional boxer and I were chosen to attend the first Ranger School set up in America in World War II to train young men who they thought would make excellent Ranger instructors because of their athletic background or whatever. And off to that school we went, and there was about 200 of us from that division, which is 15,000 men. Hopefully the graduates would be instructors throughout the division to teach Ranger tactics and all that Rangers have to know, their expertise. We did not know each other by name or rank. We wore coveralls, and we had to participate in the roughest and toughest kind of training and combat, hand-to-hand combat, and jiu-jitsu as it was called then, karate as it's called now, and other things. Of that 100 or a couple hundred, less than half graduated, and I was one of the half that graduated and was offered a job as first sergeant of D Company of the 2nd Ranger Battalion. And quite frankly, I was also being considered at the time for first sergeant of the Headquarters Company, because at that point in time, the first sergeants were older men of the regular Army, held reserve commissions, and they were called up to become the captains that they were in the reserves. And they needed just younger guys to fill in. So I went for the first ones that would give me the first sergeant stripes, because I had elderly parents to support. If you survived and graduated, you were in, and you became the instructor. Now, if you're talking about how do we sift them out in the Ranger battalions in the actual field, where we went to Camp Forest in Tullahoma, Tennessee. That's where the 2nd Ranger Battalion was activated, organized. And that was as of April 1, 1943. Now, we went through about 2,000 men, sifted, supposedly volunteers all, the cream of the crop from all over the nation. And how did we sift them? Well, if they survived and they were bright enough, we'd check them out psychologically and their mentality, their IQs, and everything else, and they could withstand our, what I call brutal training and tests constantly and survive it all, we would seriously consider them for acceptance into our battalion. We, from those 2,000 men that were already volunteers, supposedly the cream of the crop, we took only 500. The rest were rejected. Whatever the best tests were, say for West Point or Annapolis or the academies, we had to take the same tests. That's mentally. In the field, we had to do everything that we were told to do, and some of those things seemed to be impossible, but there are men who will do them, and there are men who won't do them. And the ones that won't, they're gone the next day. We had to climb cliffs as high as 200 or 300 feet straight up, no safety rope. The mere thought of that, to some men, they didn't want to go any further. They were ready to leave right away. But many of us did it many, many times. And those who If you refuse in the Rangers to do what the rest of us do, you don't get a second chance. Much of our training was with live fire to learn all about weapons and explosives and bring realism to our exercises, our problems that we would be confronted with in combat. So live fire wasn't exciting to us very long. If you're thinking of the live fire coming at us on an obstacle course, there was a level, if we were crawling under fences or under barbed wire or through barbed wire, or somebody was throwing their bodies on the barbed wire, there was a level below which the live fire was not hitting us. We knew it was going over our heads. That meant we had to keep our heads down and be prepared now. That's true, but I don't recall anyone ever being hit by live fire. Certainly I knew the Rangers would be much more risky than line troops of regular infantry. The infantry are trained for ground warfare, and they're well trained to do the job that they are called upon to do. We are a little bit different. We land by sea, land, or air, or however. We volunteer for anything and everything. So we've all participated in all these methods of warfare. I was apprehensive of the dangers. Any sensible man would be, but a sensible man is a thinking man, and I always prided myself in thinking our guys had the most common sense, and that's what was a lifesaver in the long run. More common sense than the average man has, and good judgment. They don't commit suicide. They call us suicide squads, suicide platoons. I never felt that way about us. We were cool, calm, collected, and very thoughtful. We figured a way to accomplish the objective without being idiots or doing the foolish things that get yourself killed.
But to accomplish these heroic tasks would require the highest quality leadership. Many were tried, but only one was up to the job.
We had tried back in April of 1943 to find a commanding officer. And unfortunately, several were chosen. I'm not going to mention names. None of them could handle it for one reason or another. But along came a Major James Earl Rudder. He was quite a guy. He was about 10 years older than the rest of us. A big man, an athlete, a teacher, many things in civilian life and in the reserves. He rose to lieutenant colonel when he took us over in the summer of 1943, and he was our big brother. We suddenly really took form and measured up to high expectations, and it was him that was able to pull us together with his leadership. He just knew how to handle men, and he was inspiring. You would do anything for your big brother if you had a big brother like this guy was. He was fair-minded, he was intelligent, he was reasonable, and as good at anything. I marveled at him because he wasn't thin like the rest of us. We were raw bone muscle, not an ounce of fat on us.
Now that they had a capable leader, they needed a mission, one that would test their awesome capabilities.
If you had as much cliff climbing training as the Rangers of my battalion, the 2nd Ranger Battalion, had, you knew that someday in the future cliffs were going to be there. So we didn't know how or why we were supposed to be experts at this and experts at that, but we knew it may have something to do with objectives in the future that we would be called upon to accomplish. But we never learned the true facts of where we were going to land on D-Day till a month or two before D-Day. And then our training only consisted of studying aerial photographs that the Air Force brought back, showing this point, and we didn't even know the name of the point. It wasn't told to us at the time. We just had photographs, and we could see these big abutments, concrete emplacements, where these big 55 millimeter coastal guns, their barrels sticking out. It was a fortress, underground tunnels and tracks, and bringing in the ammunition, troop quarters, and observation on the point, by the way, that still stands. They didn't penetrate that or blow it off the point of Point de Hoc. But in that training phase for a few months before D-Day, we didn't know where these pictures were taken of, what the name of the place was, but we could see we had a 100-foot cliff to climb, a very narrow beach there, and what we were assigned to do, told the mission would be in 3 parts, namely get the guns out of action as quickly as possible, render them inoperable, and then cut off the coast road between Utah Beach and Omaha Beach by establishing roadblocks. And the third part of our mission was to cut all communications between Utah Beach and Omaha Beach. And that's what we did as quickly as we could. And it was explained to us that it was one of the most important missions of D-Day.
With the rigorous training complete and the Rangers ready, it was time to go. They headed across the dark and rough English Channel on a fateful day known as D-Day.
We were not on American ships, and we did not land with an American LCA. We were aboard English channel steamers, passenger ships, as a transport that had in place of its lifeboats on it these small landing craft, British landing craft manned by the British Navy, on which about 25 fellas, Rangers, would be on each of these small landing crafts. We had 3 to accompany. And it was a horrible day weather-wise. The sea, it had been a terrible storm a day or so before, and a couple days later was an awful storm. But it was horrendous. The swells were high, it was rough, it was cold, it was rainy, and we circled about, and it's a couple-hour run from the transport area to the landing area. So that's 2 hours. In our case, we went toward the point, and suddenly we realized the coxswain, the British coxswain, was headed for the wrong cliff, not Point de Hoc. That meant that they had to then turn right, as Colonel Rudder brought to his attention, his error, turn right, parallel the cliffs about 300 yards, and go for 3 miles, which was running a gauntlet of fire because you got Germans all along the top of those cliffs firing at you for 3 miles. And then you do a quick left turn to salt the small, narrow beach below these 100-foot cliffs, and you got the Germans up there leveled in on you, firing away at you as you're coming ashore. So we had a lot of fire coming at us for 3 miles, however long that takes, plus the run in. A couple of men got injured, boats got hit regularly. Fortunately, none of the mortars fell in our boats, but they were dropping mortars all around us too. And in the stormy weather, we were soaking wet. The boats were taking waves over the bow. We were up to our knees in water, bailing with the bilge pumps could not get the water out of the boat. So we had to bail with our helmets. It was uncomfortable. It was cold. Some men were seasick, and I suppose apprehensive they'll be hit by shrapnel or rifle fire. And then when we did land and the revs went down, of course it was our duty to just run forward and grab a rope and get up that cliff and kill as many Germans as we could. So we got organized to go forth and destroy the big guns and neutralize the whole area.
But just getting out of the assault craft would prove to be almost fatal.
I was the first one wounded. I didn't realize I was wounded at the time. I got this burning sensation through my right side, spun me around, and as I went out the ramp, I went out of sight. over my head in water because of a shell crater there that I didn't see, didn't really think about. And the guys pulled me out, and we did whatever we had to do on these unexpected things and got to the rope as quickly as possible. And some of us got up out of 225 of us that assaulted the cliffs, 180 of us got to the top. What caused this series of mistakes, when that coxswain made that mistake going to the wrong point, it cost us 30 precious minutes on our landing at Pointe du Hoc, which enabled the Germans to come out of their underground hideaways, crew quarters, and machine gun bunkers to be waiting for us. See, if we were able to land and assault with precision, as all of the other fire support were to be lifted at 6:30, and we hit at 6:30, we would have taken them by surprise. They wouldn't have been out. We'd have been up before they got out, but it was the reverse of that. They were waiting for us. They were just standing there, just shooting us off the posts as we come in, shooting us off the beach, or on the flanks and the side of the. See, it was the point came out, and then there was a couple little coves, and on the side of each cove was machine gun emplacements, concreted, cemented into the face of the cliff with supporting steelwork and all that. And they had a field day just picking us off. Sometimes away from the edge of the cliff, maybe the grapnel hook would be maybe 20, 30, 40 feet inland. Well, those guys would cut those cables or ropes that far, and we could not see them from the bottom of the beach looking up. We didn't get a shot at them. But some of our guys would, at the water's edge, with special snipers, special expert marksmen, would be there to pick off those Germans that they could. How many of each died and were wounded, I don't know. All I know is we were successful. Out of the 225 that landed that morning, 180 of us got up. Lucky, I'll say. Fortunately for us, we could run in and out of shell craters and the like to make our way to check different positions and move out from there. Some wonderful benefit that the boys at Omaha Beach didn't have, because no shell craters or bomb craters were found on Omaha Beach. They had nothing to hide in, but we did. The place was decimated. You could look across that point and it looked like the face of the moon with all the thousands of holes and craters and the like. The emplacements, concrete, several feet thick with steel rods in it. It was blown to kingdom come. But there were no guns. And what made you think there might still be some was their telephone poles or timbers or whatever they had sticking out of some of the emplacements. But you could see the guns had never been there. You know, when you've gotten to your position where you're about to think about destroying them and it's not there, it's disappointing, but we're prepared for that. And in combat, we were trained, you'll come face to face with many disappointments, but you've got to have the good common sense and brains to figure things out quick and move accordingly and accomplish the objective. You look across that landscape, 40 acres, flat, nothing but shell craters and blown to kingdom come. It had to be inland, so we looked inland, we saw trees and what looked like a rural setting, and there was only one road out of the point. There were minefields on each side, and I figured there's men there, they come and go, so they must come and go that road too. So they had a machine gun covering it, and they had another emplacement covering a billet nearby with a slip above ground. So we had to take them out. We neutralized that machine gun nest, killed them and sent them running for cover. And we got through that thinking, well, we'll get out to that road, get to the coast road that run between Utah Beach and Omaha Beach, and we'll look if we see anything. And we turned right because we were assigned to the west flank of the invasion area. We came upon this sunken road between two hedgerows. Now, that's another thing. We didn't know much about hedgerows. It just seemed, really, it was a frightening sight. We didn't, you know, an American boy looks at a hedgerow, maybe 3 feet high, or very seldom are they much more. These were like 15 feet high with trees growing out, like 30, 40 feet in the air. You could have hit a column of tanks in this hedgerow and never have seen them from this coast road. So we saw where that, going from the blacktop into that sunken farm road between pastures, something heavy or something had cut up the dirt. Well, farm wagons have a steel rim on them, and that could have been it. We didn't know what could, but quite frankly, we're not about to cut across the middle of a field or a pasture and silhouette ourselves. We sent our men out of the platoon. That we had 22 men when we started from the cliff. By the time we got to the coast road, there was only 12 of us left. The rest of them had become casualties, killed or wounded badly. So the 12 I had left, 10 of them, the 2 staff sergeants took their men and set up the roadblock out there on the road, on the blacktop road.
They had descended into the meat grinder known as the hedgerows. These ancient earthen berms were to prove a killing ground for the first Allies, then the Germans who occupied them. The Rangers developed a unique patrolling tactic for the terrain.
We have a pattern of patrolling called leapfrogging. I stand here or hide or make myself invisible, try to stop breathing so no German can hear us, that kind of thing. And Jack will run up 10, 15, 20 yards, hoping he can get to that spot where he wants to be to make his observation. I cover him while he does so. Then I go by him another 30 yards. He covers me, and we're leapfrogging, protecting one another, going inland. We had gone inland about 100 yards, and it just so happened on my leap around him to the hedgerow, I looked over, and there before me was a swale, an indentation. Of course, back from the edge of the cliff, the land starts to fall in the rear down to the lowlands. Well, I looked over and I looked down, and it was a swale, an apple orchard, and there were the guns all set up, textbook ready to be fired, but no men that we could see. So we looked around, and we couldn't see every part of that orchard, but as for what we could see, we couldn't see any men there. But we saw about 75 to 80 men, I guess it was, 100 yards away. There's a sunken road behind this orchard that kind of paralyzed the blacktop road. And there was another farm road up westward of us. We had just been past, Jack and I, when we were leapfrogging, trying to get to where, find these guns. A German combat patrol of about 50 men, heavily armed, was coming and went by us within 20 feet of us, and we were hidden in a ditch. But we did not fire for the reason that our orders were stop anybody coming from Utah Beach toward Omaha Beach, so to stop any help to get to Omaha where the divisions were low. These men were coming the opposite direction. They were going toward Utah Beach, so we didn't feel that we should give up our position or signal were any men there, because I don't think they even thought there was a German that far inland. We're about a mile inland. So anyway, we saw these men, and that patrol, by the way, was going west on the Blacktop Road in a field behind a wall. We noticed that they came out and crossed over half a mile west of us and went in a parallel to the road that Jack Kuhn and I were going in, where we found the guns. They came upon those men that we saw over there, the Germans. It appeared to us that some German officer, non-com, was standing by his vehicle talking to these men. I don't know what he was talking about. We couldn't hear him, whether he was bringing them up to date, but I don't think he knew we were, there was an American soldier near there. He was probably telling what to update him on how the invasion's going. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning. So I said, Jack, hop up there and cover me. I'm going in and do the best I can with it. He had a thermite grenade. Now, we were given thermite grenades. They're about the size of a little longer beer can. But the composition that's in there, the incendiary compounds or whatever they are, when when air hits it, it becomes molten metal and it runs out like you could pour it out. Anything among the gears or in the hinges where this molten metal can flow, liquid as it became, molten metal as it became, it would seep down into those crevices of the gears and everything, and as air hit it, it cooled off and it just locked everything and made it inoperable. I've read so many books about how we were supposed to have thrown grenades down the boat. We couldn't even reach the top of the barrel. They're so high. I'd had to gone out in the middle and make myself exposed to everybody and get on Jack's shoulders to throw things down. We didn't do anything like that. But anyway, and then I took I had a submachine gun, and Jack did too. He was up on the top of the hedgerow, keeping his eyes glued on those Germans. So I said, see, if they even look this way, I want you to drill the first one you can, because I got to be warned so we can get out of there. So anyway, it did the 2 guns, put them out of action, rendered them inoperable, took my field jacket off, wrapped it around the butt of my submachine gun, and smashed as best I could the gun sights of all 5 guns. And came back to Jack and said, hey, we got to go back to the guys at the road and get some more, because I got 3 guns that I can't do any more with it. So we ran back, 100 yards, 150 yards, whatever it was. We were in pretty good shape in those days. How long does it take you to run back? And each guy gives me we just stuff them in our jacket and shirts and everything. And run back. I don't think it took us 10 minutes to run 100 yards and back. They do the mile and I forget the 100-yard dash, but we were pretty fast. So we got back and went back the same course down that sunken road. There was no Germans. We didn't encounter anything, to where we had spotted them. We looked up over the hedgerow and they were still there talking. They hadn't heard us, and actually, when you think of it, there was nothing for them to do, for the reason that they couldn't get fire orders from their observation point, because E Company is killing them out there on the point. They're observers. We were at the right place at the right time, and there was a lull in the battle because they couldn't get firing orders back from whatever source. And they weren't going to be sitting ducks for fire, because you see the 88s behind them inland had been firing on the Rangers on the cliffs and crawling fire, and the Texas, our backup, and the destroyers were trying to get back at those 88s. Well, anyway, we come back, we use the thermite grenades to finish off the guns. And as I'm coming out of the swale, the apple orchard, having destroyed and rendered inoperable the 5 guns, Jack says, come on, Len, let's get out of here. We were both nervous at that point. I crawl up the embankment of that hedgerow. It's 9 feet where I was crawling. A big explosion occurs. We couldn't hear with each other, so we just ran like a couple scared rabbits as fast as we could back to the Blacktop Road, where our 10 men were in a roadblock position, and our ears cleared up. And then we started rationalizing, what the hell happened? I concluded that maybe the Texas, or the destroyers trying to get those 88s that were shelling the dickens out of us earlier, may have had a short round, as so often happens.
The guns they destroyed were more menacing even than they appeared, for their large caliber shells could have zeroed in on successive waves of men breaching the German wall surrounding Europe.
We were not expecting to see them pointed at Utah Beach, because we didn't know much about Utah Beach and the 4th Division and the guys up that way. In combat, you only know what's going on a couple hundred yards around you. You may know something of the big picture, and you may know all of your battalion's mission, but that surprised us. But we didn't know the capability of these guns. They had a firing range of 10 to 12 miles. They could hit the armada of ships that were anchored 12, 13 miles off the coast. They could reach all the beaches, the Allied beaches, and certainly the American beaches and Utah beaches, and they had a 360-degree, and they were mobile, they were on wheels. They could move them anywhere. But they were pointed in that direction. they would have destroyed many of the vessels, many of the ships, many of the transports, or if they hit the LCAs, the big LCAs. You know, I was speaking of our LCA, 25 guys, but you got big American LCAs, landing craft assault, that have hundreds of guys on them. And then they have tanks on them, and they're all susceptible for that fire, and would have been blown right out of the water. But worst of all, they could have tore up all the beaches with the men swarming over them, because, you know, Omaha Beach was bloody Omaha. They stopped the landings. It was so bloody. And had these guns been able to add to that, they would have just blown that beach to kingdom come.
Lomell's gallantry netted him a field promotion, but his next encounter with the Germans would be a bit unorthodox.
Then, after D-Day, I became the sergeant major of the highest enlisted man rate for the battalion at headquarters, combat sergeant major. And I went with Major Slater, Duke Slater. He used to be my company commander. He became executive officer. And he and I and some others went down to meet with, I think, the 29th Division, because we kidded the 29th Division guys of having several divisions, a couple in the hospital, a couple in the graveyard, one in the field, and one in training. That sort of humor, you know. And as I recall, I could see that from the hilltop we were on with our headquarters, a battalion headquarters. He was coming up a road, and I could see another patrol coming. And I thought the patrol I saw was my own old company, D, sending a patrol up. It looked to me like Lieutenant Edlin and his patrol wanted to get to the fort faster than our D Company patrol, the old competition thing again. And he and his patrol got there, and they shouldered their arms as if it was a Sunday afternoon, and they walked right in the gates of these Germans with machine guns and everything, as if nothing's going wrong. And essentially, brief as I can be, say, "Take me to your leader," and they did. One thing led to another, and Bob Edlin, Bob and one of his guys spoke German, were taken to the commanding officer of that fortress, and they explained through his interpreter that they had it surrounded with 50,000 Rangers. There's only 500 of us in the battalion, and mostly were shot up and only at half strength. But the colonel wouldn't. The German colonel wouldn't surrender to him as a lowly lieutenant, only to Colonel Rudder. So word came back to us that Colonel Rudder would have to come down to take the surrender. So Colonel asked me to go get some vehicles, any kind of vehicles. And we didn't have many vehicles. You know, Rangers don't have their own vehicles as such. So I went to nearby outfits and borrowed command cars and tried to make a contingency look like a real important group of officers coming. And it was only Colonel Rudder and a few of his officers in one command car, another command car filled with what looked to be dignitaries or officers or high-ranking people, but they weren't. And then I brought up a few 6x6s, big transport trucks for prisoners. Well, to make a long story short, he did affect the surrender, and most effectively because it got a little rough in there. He grabbed that colonel by the belt buckle and shoved a grenade in his tummy and told him he was either going to do it or get blown to bits at that moment.
With the Germans' doubts overruled, the surrender proceeded as planned, one of the gutsiest actions of World War II.
When we come in with our pretended convoy of important people and my trucks, I noticed that patrol had those German prisoners all organized. They had all their weapons on one side of the road and all the prisoners on the other side of the road sitting there with their hands on their heads, waiting for us. And there was only 4 guys that did all of that because they thought they were surrounded by 50,000 Rangers. We didn't have that many in the war. As a matter of fact, we only had 3,000 Rangers in World War II. 6 battalions, 500 each, plus replacements.
Sidney Salomon was destined to live through the invasion and the rest of the war. He was working for a Wisconsin newspaper when he heard the call to arms and enlisted in March of 1942. After a rushed stint in officers' candidate school, he became a second lieutenant in the Army Rangers. By June of 1944, it was his turn to lead the charge to freedom. In a darkened transport wallowing in the choppy English Channel, his men were awakened from their fitful slumbers at 3 a.m. It was time to prepare for the greatest assault of all time.
With the busy fall season just around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Too busy with your end-of-summer goals to cook but want to make sure you're eating well? With Factor, skip the extra trip to the grocery store and the chopping, prepping, and cleaning up too, while still getting the flavor and nutritional quality you need. Factor's fresh, never-frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy, then get back to crushing your goals. Level up with Gourmet Plus options prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccolini, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. With Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in our meals. This August, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door, ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/warriors50 and use code warriors50 to get 50% off. That's code warriors50 at factormeals.com/warriors50 to get 50% off.
We went in with the British Navy. We had trained with the American Navy, but we went in with the British Navy. The transport in which I was, C Company was on, and A and B Company was called the HMS Prince Charles. And we were on there. Now we went in, our H hour was at 6:30 in the morning. So we were awakened at between 3 and 3:30 a.m. in the morning. And those who wanted to eat could eat. Not very many of them were in the mood to eat a breakfast, though. Only the so-called chow hounds ate breakfast, and they regretted it later on. But at between 4 and 4:30, we were alerted to go up on the boat deck because the landing craft were hanging in the davits of the Prince Charles. And remember, the invasion was to be on the 5th of June, but because of the stormy weather and the rough seas, it was postponed for 24 hours. Well, on June 6th, the rain had stopped, but the seas were still pretty choppy. And we got up on the boat deck, and by 4:30 we were climbing over there was a plank on that the British seamen had put up on the railing on the boat deck over to the landing craft. And the landing craft was swinging with the motion of the boat. So the British seamen were there, and they helped us up on to get up on the plank, and then we walked over. Now it's dark, perfectly dark, and they kept saying they would help us up there, and we'd walk a plank. I felt just like a pirate days. And they said, "Do not look down." Well, I looked down. I wanted to see why I shouldn't look down, and that was a great sight there, because way down there in the dark, you could see the phosphorescence of the ocean as it lapped against the hull of the Prince Charles. But then we got into the landing craft, and now only two of us were going, because my platoon had one landing craft, and the first platoon had the other landing craft, and we went down together, and then we circled around till we were both side by side, and then we went in. Now in my landing craft, I had 37 men. Tide was at low tide, just starting to come in. So as we approached the, we're probably 10 or 12 miles out in the channel. That took a good hour, maybe a little over an hour, to get in. And so by the time we reached the shore, before we reached the shore, the dawn broke. And when the dawn broke, and then as we got closer, and then we saw that we were headed right to where we wanted to go. Well, everything was fine. But then I could, as we got closer, I could see the concentric circles in the water around us. And that was artillery and mortar shells landing. Fortunately, none of them hit us, but they were landing all around us. And you could see the circles because I was standing up there. Then as we got a little closer, you could hear the ping of the German machine gun, small arms fire, hitting the steel-hulled landing craft. Some of the men may have been scared. I was not scared, because I figured I was well trained, and I didn't know what to be afraid of. So I'd never been in combat. I thought, those guys, it's just like going into a football game. You're trained, and you know if you're not trained, if you didn't pay attention, if your coach didn't train you, why, then you would have butterflies, because you don't know what the other guy is going to do, and you don't read the papers, and all we heard was that the Germans were supermen. Well, so were we. We had good training, and now I stood. Now this is I'm going to put a little bit of humor in this. In our dry run, in getting into the landing craft on shore, we had never got into the landing craft with full ammunition and a full supply of ammunition, nor the food rations that we were going to carry, because our kitchens and supply train trucks weren't going to come in until 5 days after the invasion. Never did we carry all that, what we should have. So we get into the landing craft. Now everybody's got 5 days supply of ammunition, 5 days supply of K rations and what we call D bars, which are little, looks like a Hershey bar, an inch square, 3 of them to that was a day's ration. And a 1 inch square was a meal. And of course, psychologically, when you ate that, you couldn't finish that 1 square, and you knew it was just psychologically. It was so loaded with calories or whatever. So now we get into that landing craft, and everybody's so bulked up with the landing, there wasn't room for me to sit down. So, and I'm the first one going off as the lieutenant. I'm the first one that was going to jump off the ramp. So I stood up next to the sub-lieutenant, the English sub-lieutenant, who was in charge of the 2 landing craft, and I stood next to him. He had to stand too. So we're going in, and I'm just standing there taking in the scenery. I'm standing up, and when the small arms fire start pinging on the steel-hulled landing craft, every once in a while I'd squat down a little behind the steel door, because I'm standing right in front of a steel door that the sub-lieutenant is going to, he's going to swing that open, and then the ramp is going to go down, and I'm going to jump to the right, and then we had it all. This is how we all planned it in our dry runs, and the second man would go off to the left, and alternately right and left. In addition, the tide is just starting to come in, so every time a man jumps off, the boat is that much lighter. The tide is coming in, and we're going in. So now the sub-lieutenant calls out, "Go!" And I push open the door. He lets go of the rope with the ramp that goes down. I jump off to the right. Sergeant Reed, who is the next man, he jumps off to the left. Now I land in water, about up to my waist. And I'm loaded down with ammunition, and I'm carrying one 6-millimeter mortar shell to have one more shell for my mortar section, and holding my Tommy gun up high so it doesn't get wet. And in addition, now this doesn't take as long as it takes me to explain it. I'm trying to get my feet on flat on the bottom. And Sergeant Reed, the second man off to the left, he got hit just as he jumped off. So I got my feet squared away, and Sergeant Reed is underneath the ramp. So I reached over and grabbed him by the collar and yanked him out from underneath the landing craft. Otherwise, he would have been submarine. And I started up, sloshing through the surf and up on the sand there. And I figured about, I guess maybe about 15 yards. And I said, I dropped him and I said, Sergeant, the aid man will come and get you. I've got to get on my way. So I started running. And I hadn't run more than, maybe 10 yards. And a German mortar shell landed right behind me and killed or wounded my entire mortar section. And it knocked me, I just got shrapnel in my back, it knocked me flat face down on the sand. And I just dropped the mortar shell down there. And I thought, man, I must be dead. But then, in the next instant, sand started kicking up in my face. And then I realized I'm not dead, and I thought, hey, some machine gunner's got his bead on me, and he's getting the range, and I better get the heck up and run. Well, that's what I did. I picked up and ran into the base of the cliff. And I was about 100 yards, I'd say almost 100 yards wide of sand that we had to cross. I started reaching in my field jacket, I forgot about that, for the maps. And my platoon sergeant came running up, and I said, Sergeant Kennedy, and I'm reaching in. Then I realized that I'm alive. So I didn't get the maps out to give it to him. And that's when I got up and I ran as fast as I could to the base of the cliff. The aid man came running over to me, and I started to take my jacket off and my shirt off, and he picked out some shrapnel out of my back, and this is before the days of penicillin. So he took a packet of sulfa powder and sprinkled that on the where the shrapnel was, and put a patch on it and said, that's all I can do for now, Lieutenant. Put my shirt back on, my jacket, and I said, let's start up. That's where all of our casualties happen. Now, I've got all the figures. These are the official figures. This is where I say the Pointe du Hoc area was the glamorous one. Ours, with A and B, had the most hazardous one. And it was hazardous because we had to run across 100 yards of beach before we started to climb up the cliff. 21 men were killed. 20 of them were killed crossing that beach in the first 10 or 15 minutes. Only one man was killed up on top of the cliff. That was the other lieutenant, Bill Moody. And he was killed right next to me when we were lying in a shell hole. So 20 men were killed in the first 10, 15 minutes crossing that beach. Now these are from the official battalion medical report. 21 men killed on June 6th from C Company. The next was D Company that came in, Lomell's company at Pointe du Hoc. They had 14 men. Now let's go back, and E Company up at Pointe du Hoc, they had 9 men killed. F Company at Pointe du Hoc had 6 men killed. Now our A and B companies had 13 and 12 men killed on the beach, crossing that beach. They had the same similar beach to cross as we did, 100 yards, and that's where ours was the most hazardous. And Headquarters Company had 6 men killed. Now those 6 men are killed because they're aid men and radio men, and actually assigned to each one of the line companies as radio men and aid men. But a total of 81 men killed, but 52 men from A, B, and C, and 29 men from D, E, and F. We had twice as many killed. We didn't have any beach obstacles where we were, because if we're the German soldiers, they figured, what dumb soldiers would make a landing here at a cliff where they had to climb a cliff? Well, we were the dumb soldiers. We were the smart ones. But the beach obstacles, which were to prevent the tanks to come in and land, and supposedly to get landing craft. The 116th Regiment of the 29th, they hid behind these. You've seen pictures of those of combat time. And that's where the men got killed. We told our guys, run across the beach, run. You know, a man running is not a good target for somebody with a rifle. But a stationary target is absolutely perfect. Now, they had 2 bazooka men, one in each assault section. And my radio man was killed, so we didn't have any radio, we didn't have any communication. The radio was in the English Channel. The BAR men, they lost their BARs in the drink. When we got up on top, the only thing I did was get all my men together. Now, we had 9 men up there. Out of the 37 men in my landing craft, I counted 9 of us up on top. Only 2 of those 9 had not been wounded. Now, the other 7, of course, counting me, were lightly wounded, still able to climb up there. The seriously wounded were still down below. So, but with 9 men, I figured there's no point in continuing our mission. We're not an effective fighting force. So I'm laying in a shell hole there. And just about 10 yards from the top of the cliff. And that's when Bill Moody came, the other platoon leader, came running over and jumped off to my right. And I said, Bill, I just spotted a trench up ahead. And I said, so I pulled back down, and he reached up and peered out over the edge of the shell hole, and then all of a sudden he fell on my right side, and I looked at him, and he'd been killed, instantly killed. He peered over when I said there's a trench up ahead of us, and he looked up to see where it was, because I pointed out to him where it was. And as he reached up on his haunches a little to look over the edge of the shell hole, that's when I didn't stay up there because I had already seen it. And so I reached down again, and just then, he fell over on my right side, and I looked there, and I was wondering why he did that. Then I saw that he had been killed instantly, and he'd been drilled right through the forehead with a sniper fire. And so I turned around and grabbed 2 men, and I said, follow me, and we ran across to that trench. And we just started to go through that, clear out the trench. And I came to a dugout. I could see a dugout ahead. And before I got to that, I was carrying 2 grenades on my suspenders of my cartridge belt. So I took that, and I threw that ahead, put a curve on it, and waited, because it went off in there. And then we waited I don't know, maybe a minute or so. And then we ran ahead and sprayed the inside of it. That was that. Then we went on ahead, and then we didn't go running ahead. We went cautiously, the 3 of us. And so I was leading the way, and then I came across the mortar position, which they said was up there. And there it was like a great big manhole. And it wasn't manned though. They were probably all in that so-called fortified house. So we went into the hole there where the mortar was, and it was, of course, it was like a manhole, and it was cement lined. So, and on the wall were the targets up at the beach, where the main invasion force was coming in, with all the elevations and the setting for, because they had flags up on the beach there, and everyone was just like a flag on a golf course, and with that number painted on the side of the walls of the mortar hole was the elevation there. So we just took the butts of our rifle and knocked out all the mechanism that sets that, and then went on. And we decided, well, then another trench came off to our right. And I debated, so we went on a little ahead, but I figured, well, I don't know where that one to the right goes, because to the left is the main invasion beach. And I went around, there was a curve ahead, and went cautiously, and I thought, I better not go too far, because I don't know if anybody's going to come from the right and get us from behind. So we went around this curve. It's just as clear today as it was 55 years ago. And a German came from the opposite direction. Well, he was more startled than I was, and he stopped dead in his tracks. And I grabbed him. I thought, maybe we ought to take one prisoner to maybe get some information. So I had Steve grab him, took his weapons away from him, and I said, take him back and put him down the back of the cliff where Ralph Goranson was. And I said, maybe we can get some information. So he took him back, and I don't know whether he gave him a push to get down there or what. I couldn't care less. But I turned around and came back, and I told Ralph that Bill had been killed. And I said, I think the best bet is for us to hold on to this ground up here, because we didn't have any communication with anybody else. Our radios were gone in a drink. And Ralph was trying to get some of the less serious wounded who were able to make it to go up to where A and B were coming in and try to make a contact with them so we could meet up with them. So we stayed up there. I stayed up on top for the rest of the day and just made certain that nobody came in. We dug a foxhole. We dug slit trenches up there, and I stayed up there that night. But they didn't counterattack where we were. I'm assuming they knew where the main invasion was coming in, the main force was coming in, and they wouldn't think of anybody was coming in where the where Cliff was. So, matter of fact, when I woke up, just after dawn, early in the morning, and here, maybe 500, 700 yards away, in the next field, a couple of fields away, I guess, there are two old French women rounding up the cows that hadn't been killed by by artillery. Cows had to be milked that morning. So they took the cows and rounded them up and took them in there. Now, Ralph sent up word, we're going to meet A and B Company. Only one officer was alive. All the others had been killed and wounded, either in A and B. So we were going to meet the remnants of them out on a blacktop road that paralleled the cliff. It was about 3/4 of a mile from the cliff. And that's the road we were going to take anyway and get up to Pointe du Hoc to meet up with DENF there. So we went up and met Captain Arnold of B Company, was the only officer there. All the rest had been killed or seriously wounded. Well, you can't imagine it as a civilian unless you've been in service and unless you've been in a combat unit. I would never have given it a thought, except I knew we were in a combat unit. Now, about 8, 9, 10 days after the invasion, that's when I was promoted to captain and took over B Company. And I stayed with B Company to the end of the war. By the end of the war, I'd had 200% turnover in B Company. Now, not all of those were killed, but if they weren't killed, they were so seriously wounded, they weren't sent back to the company. And hey, this is war. This is not a game. This is not a football game. When you get hurt in a football game and you go to the sidelines, a substitute comes in and takes your place. But this is war. This is either I'm going to kill somebody before he kills me. And it isn't a game. And we're mentally prepared for that. All of our training has been psychologically prepared for that. You got to be very close with some guys, even though you came close with them over the times in service, because I relied on them, and by the same token, they relied on me to keep them alive. This June, and one of the trips back to Normandy, we're in my first trip back was in 1979. At that time, I was national president of the Ranger Battalion Association. And I went to the military cemetery at that time, and I got the location of a lot of my men, and I went to there and I saluted them. Now this June, and I go back every 5 years and do that. Now this June, a reporter from the local newspaper where I lived called me up and asked if he got an okay from the paper, could they go along and join the Rangers? And I said yes. So he came with me, and he came with us on our trip, and we went into the Normandy, the military cemetery there. I said, before we go anywhere else, I have what I call is my duty, my mission, and I go there and had the location of these men's graves. There are 9,900 and some odd graves there, almost 10,000 graves there. But I go and I salute them.
It took courage, cunning, and more than a dash of luck to survive the war and live to talk about it. But Leonard Lomell, Sidney Salomon, and many other brothers in arms lived on to inspire us with tales of great deeds of heroism and bravery as they recall their days as U.S. Army Rangers of World War II. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation of In Their Own Words. This program was created and produced by First Person Productions Incorporated in association with the Documentary Broadcasting Company. Produced by David Benson. Written by Rod Pyle. Engineered by Greg Bartheld and Brian Donovan. Narrated by Bill Ratner. This production is copywritten by First Person Productions Incorporated. Any unauthorized broadcast, public performance, or copying is a violation of applicable laws.
Coming up on 5 Minute News, I'm Anthony Davis. You might think it's partisan because maybe it's critical of one side or the other, but it's not, it's just the truth. And I think that's also something that's kind of unusual for Americans listening to the radio or to podcasts, because the news landscape in the States has been so partisan for so many decades. So 5 Minute News is verified, truthful, independent, unbiased, and essential world news daily.